Welcome to this episode of Kent Hance, the best storyteller in Texas podcast. Make sure you go through our past episodes. There are a lot of great interviews, a lot of great stories to be heard, so just scroll through wherever you're listening to this, and you'll find some of the older ones in there too. There's some good stuff. We start every episode with the saying of the day. Chancellor, what do you have for us?
C.S. Lewis said, you can't go back and start the beginning, but you can start now and make sure you have a good ending. I always like that. You know, sometimes we get going and we get to think about, well, if I could have done this, if I could, hey, look, it happened, move on. This week, I want to mention, I mentioned it about my law partner of 32 years, Terry Scarborough, passed away, fought leukemia. They gave him 6 to 8 months, and he turned it in 3.5 years. He's a tough guy, played football at Tech, was a first-team All-State in high school at Petersburg. They won the state championship and played in, I think it was Lubbock or may have been Petersburg, but they were playing George West, and it snowed. And those kids from George West had never seen snow except on TV, you know. And Scarborough, they won the state championship, and he had a lot of his old buddies were there for the funeral, and we tried to. He wanted them to laugh and have a good time and think about all the things he had done. There was a lawyer there, Ray Thomas, from the Valley. He's one of the best lawyers in the state, but a great litigator in the Valley. We always hired him if we had a case down there. And he and Scarborough were on the same side, and they were at mediation. And the person on the other side asked later in the day to meet with Scarborough and Thomas, and without his lawyer. And that's kind of odd, but the lawyer agreed, and so he met with him, and this guy starts telling him a story about another lawsuit. Finally, they said, Scarborough interrupted him and said, why are you telling us? He said, well, I'll settle the case and give y'all what you want if you'll agree to represent me in this other case, which is a pretty good compliment. And they did, and they got what they wanted and won a case for that guy. So it's a pretty unusual deal, to say the least. He told me one time, and my wife had told me this joke wouldn't go over, but I used it. The crowd was in a festive mood there for a while, honoring Terry, and told him a story about the guy that was coming out of a doctor's office, and a friend of his was going in. He said, what are you going to the doctor's office for? He said, I'm going to get a vasectomy. And he said, why you got a tuxedo on? He said, if I'm going to be impotent, I want to look impotent. And it's pretty lame and got a few groans, but Terry would have enjoyed it. And they had a get-together over at the Austin Country Club afterwards and told a lot of stories about things he had been involved in and where he'd been so successful, and was just an all-around good guy. Had a good family. I knew his family. I knew all the families that were related to him, and that it was a big turnout. The balcony was full. There were people standing in the aisles at the back of the church, so went well. You know, right now, everybody's trying to figure out what's going on in the Middle East, and is the Strait of Hormuz open or not? And unfortunately, right now, it's not open to regular traffic. There have been a few get through, but that's difficult. You know, you got a large 20% of the world's oil goes through that one spot, and the perceived last barrel of oil sets the price. If people think it's going to be scarce, that price is going to be pretty high, and that's the reason we got about above $100. And that affects you at the pump, affects everything that you do, because it is impacted by energy and energy prices. But the Iranians have not been successful in defending their military, their navy. Most of that's been sunk. But one place where I think we really didn't know that they had upgraded so much, drones. And there, a lot of armies from now on are going to be fighting with drones rather than just regular military soldiers. but the drones are a lot cheaper than a cruise missile, and they don't do as much damage, but they can cause some problems. And so that's what they're doing. And it's, when you have a government's theocracy and it's a religious deal, it's hard for them to compromise. They think God's on their side and they ought to do anything they want to, and there will be no consequences. I think maybe the ones that thought that have kind of gotten over it as they've seen parts of their military destroyed. But if you look at different items in the news, if I saw a CBS report and it just looked like we'd lost everything. I saw a Fox report and said, looked like we won, and I think we've won pretty big, but there's still a lot to be done before they surrender, and they may never surrender. People like that, you can't judge them by our standards because they've never lived under those standards, and they don't know how to negotiate. They've killed over 15,000 people because they demonstrated in the last a few months. And so that's a big problem. And I don't think it bothers them at all to kill their own people if they disagree with them. Former Secretary of State Pompeo said, I don't know how and when this is going to end, but I do know this: the United States has more missiles than the Iranians have Ayatollahs. And I think he's exactly right. And the guy that took his dad's place is more hardline and tougher and meaner than his dad was. Mm-hmm. So that's it. Of course, he was living in a house in London that was worth several $100 million. Mm-hmm. The people in those dictatorships that they always believe they should live at the very highest level, and everybody else should be subservient to them. Terrible situation. I think you also have to go back and look at why are we in this conflict. And, you see some commentators, why did Trump start a war? Look, those people are advancing a nuclear warhead. And if they get it, they'll use it. Other Russia and China, people like that, be highly unusual that ever use it. And but I think that with you look at the Iranians and Hezbollah and Hamas and all they've done to spread tragedy and terror around the world, they're serious about it. And if you think someone's building a nuclear warhead, you got to do something about it, especially if you think they'll use it. And that's a big deal, needs to be watched. But that's the whole reason of the conflict. And I don't think that Trump will pull out and leave Netanyahu out there. He definitely would not want anyone to think that he was not as tough or tougher than Netanyahu. And he's mad at him, and he's not going to give up. And a lot of people are saying, well, we shouldn't have started this war. Well, they've had every president's made a deal with them where they would give up enriched uranium, and they've lied every time. And so when they got hit by the bomb about 6 to 8 months ago and tore up their facilities, they immediately went back trying to rebuild it. And we were at talks with them saying, don't do that or you're going to get some consequence. I mean, they need to look at what happened in Venezuela, and none of the Democrats are taking up for the guy in Venezuela. Some of them AOC, so, well, they shouldn't have done it. And he was duly elected. He stole the election. That's not duly elected. Mm-hmm. And I think that you look at Cuba, there's talk about what will happen in Cuba. And if I were Cuba, I'd be very nervous because you're right in the backyard. The Iranians are such a long way off. It's very difficult. But I think we're winning, but it's a long way from over because the drones they have in the Strait of Hormuz can be tied up. You won't be able to get oil out of there. So that's the big issue that'll be coming up. Today's the 16th of March, and a lot happened on this day. West Point was passed by Congress 1802. In 1802, Congress also passed the Army Corps of Engineers for all construction and things like that. It was also the day of the My Lai massacre in Vietnam in 1968, and that's still a cloud that there were a lot of people killed, and the troops were getting tired of them, helping the communists, and anyway, just a situation that got out of hand. Magellan discovered the Philippines, and John Wesley Hardin was given a pardon. He supposedly killed 17 people the time he was 17, but he lived to be up in his 50s or something. He didn't keep one a year going. But he shot a guy one time for snoring too loud, shot him and killed him in the bunkhouse. The rest of them decided they'd sleep outside. They didn't think it's good to sleep in there with him having his gun and being real sensitive to people snoring. One time I got up one morning on a Saturday early morning, and I went in. My wife was looking at the phone book, and I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "I'm trying to find John Wesley Hardin." I said, "Did I snore a little last night?" A little, it's big time. The first Geneva Convention was held on this day, and Sam Houston was evicted from the state of Texas. He failed to and would refuse to sign an oath of loyalty to the Confederacy, and he wasn't for the withdrawing from the United States. And so a lot of history. Some days you look, a National Barbecue Day or something like that's the most exciting thing ever happened on that day. Mm-hmm. But that's not true. But this conflict is going to be an issue in midterm elections. Democrats are going to try to make it look like he just started a war for sake of having a war. He's going to try to make it look like he started a conflict to try to make sure they didn't get enriched uranium to the point that they could build a nuclear warhead, where in most people's thought, most experts think they would use it. And that would really create a lot of problems. In our Stupid Criminals story, I got a couple of people call me last week about the Stupid Criminals. The gang, or I say gang, 3 or 4 people, they've got a little group in Oakland and Berkeley and in Northern California that's knocking off, they're not knocking off banks, they're knocking off donut stands. And one guy called me and he said, instead of having them under stupid criminals, they need to be listed under very stupid criminals. And that there's been a few donut shops that policemen would go in there and everything, and that's where they'd hang out. So I don't understand their logic and theory behind let's rob donut shops.
How much money could be in the donut shop? I mean,
not a whole lot. If it'd be highly unusual for somebody to break $100 bill in there because they might not have change for it. There was a donut shop in Andrews, Texas, and I was working on a project out there, and a Vietnamese family that moved to Andrews. They were boat people, and a bunch of them, they got a job working in a vacuum cleaner, Kirby vacuum cleaner plant. And these people were entrepreneurs, and they went in and put in a donut shop. And I think all their kids wound up graduating valedictorian, from the high school. But those were the best donuts I've ever tasted. And I had, in 1996, I had 6 bypasses, open heart surgery. And the editor of the paper at the time wrote that he thought the reason I had 6 bypasses, he'd been with me before at that donut shop, and I'd had 6 donuts for breakfast. So I had to take donuts off my list of my favorite foods. There was, in Fairfax, Virginia, where I used to live when I was in Congress, there is a nude burglar going around, and I don't understand, but 3 different places have reported him, and we'll see what happens. And then in Florida, the police arrested a man for impersonating a policeman, and he had blue lights on his SUV, and he'd pull people over and start interviewing them about where they were going, and just kind of crazy deal. But also in Florida, there was a guy on a motorcycle. The police were after him. He ditched the motorcycle and took off running, and they had a canine dog take after him. And so he pulled his jeans off and left them behind, thinking the dog would stay there and sniff a long time. But he didn't, and he pulled his shirt off, and he pulled his shoes off, and he didn't have much left on when that dog caught him, and he surrendered real fast. Was tired of that. A bill that passed last year that had to do with not having your cell phone in school shows there's a need for it, that the ones that are allowed to have in school, 1/3 of their day is spent on the phone. And so, how do you learn anything if 1/3 of the time you're at school, you're on the phone? And that's you're seeing more and more states go to the point of saying you just can't use them. There's a company called Unclaimed Baggage in Alabama, and they have the equivalent of 40,000 trucks, garbage trucks, that they can fill with unclaimed baggage. Baggage gets lost and they can't find it, and they finally just give up, and it goes to unclaimed baggage. And they have sales. They'll have online sales and they'll have regular sales. But the most common thing to lose is clothing and shoes and things like that. But they also get some unusual things. There was one suitcase, they opened it, and it was full of rat poisoning. Oh. And you don't know where that guy is going or what he's going to do.
You got to tell that story about the ticket agent that the guy was so rude at. That's one of my favorite.
Oh, that's the one. I was in Dallas, and this guy in front of me was rude to the agent for American Airlines, and I think it was American. Anyway, it was unbelievable. He didn't cuss them, but he came real close and called them idiots, and anyway, I got up there and was checking in, and I told this agent, I said, I'm really impressed. You kept your composure, and the guy, I would have been tempted to hit him if I'd been you. He said, no, it's okay. And I said, well, how do you keep your cool on that? He said, it's pretty easy. He's going to Austin, and his bag is going to Toronto.
That's one of my favorites.
So, don't mess with somebody that can mess back. That my son has the theory, do not complain about the food at a restaurant, because it might get set back and they might do some things that you wouldn't want. Also, a study, UPI announces, study on sleeping. The average person sleeps 6.6 hours a night. It takes them about 21 minutes to get to sleep. And they have, during the month, they'll have 10 nights that are pretty good sleep. And they'll have 8 that are bad ones, and others are so-so. 76% of the people have a routine they go through before they go to bed and go to sleep. Every night, same routine. And, I got to think, that's crazy. And then I got to think, well, I try to get in bed by midnight and turn off the lights by 12:30 every night. And so I'm in that percent. I'm a night owl, but I get up at 4:30 and do emails till about 5:36, and then take a little nap, get up and go. My dad never did sleep much, and my son did. If I get a call in the morning around 5, I don't have to look and see who it is. My son, he's calling. He knows I'm up. A lot of complaints from workers that they get assigned to do things that they weren't assigned. They get items added to their portfolio, and it makes them unhappy. They're worried about it. And I think on things like this that, you need to be truthful to people and tell them, look, I wasn't hired to do that. Try to be diplomatic about it. But if it's really bad, you need to start looking for another job. If you've got a job that's fun and you like it, then you're not working. You're having a good time. But there's a lot of people that just hate their jobs, and they're not, they're not into it, especially when they go in. But if they get 9 new tasks to do, it makes it very difficult for them. I saw a study in Talker magazine that 1 in 3 in the world, that's not just the United States, in the world, believe that that the world will end in their lifetime. Now, AOC in 2022 predicted it's going to be in 2030, so we just got about 4 years. But I always, world's going to end tomorrow. You got to do this. I've never paid attention. I've always thought of those people as nuts. But I don't have time to sit around and think, if the world's going to end, what can I do to stop it? I can't, somebody said, well, don't buy a car that's not electric or something like that. I'm not foolish enough or dumb enough to think that buying an electric car would save the world. Mm-hmm. And I know there have been times in the oil and gas industry that the U.S. Geological Society said there's not going to be any more oil discovered. And they said that in 89 and in 99, 18. And then Beaumont came in 1901, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. It was huge. So there's people out there looking to come up with an answer that will help everyone. And I don't think there's a chance that the world's going to end in my lifetime. Of course, I'm 83 years old. Somebody said, "Hell, you're in." A friend of mine from East Texas told me. He said, "Hance, we're in the fourth quarter." Mm-hmm. I said, "I think it's the early fourth quarter, and I'm going into overtime. I'm not going to do otherwise." One thing that's really a problem right now is airports. The TSA. They're not getting paid. And they're working on promises, and I feel sorry for them. But Schumer said he's not going to give, and the president said he's not going to give. And the public at some point in time gets tired of it if they're waiting 3 hours to get on a plane. And Charlie Wilson had a great story that when he was a state senator, before he became a congressman, he was at an event and a woman came up to him and they'd passed a sales tax on groceries. She chewed him out about it, and finally he got in the conversation. He said, "Look, I filibustered against it. I fought it. I was on your side. You ought to be happy for me. You ought to be praise me." She said, "It don't matter. You were there." And, I think that happens at TSA if that goes on long enough that everybody's waiting 3 or 4 hours to get on a plane. They may be upset at everybody. They'll be saying, like the lady told Charlie, "It don't matter. You were there." Mm-hmm. And as Charlie said, I wasn't going to change her mind at all.
I've noticed online a lot of people are getting mad at the airlines for this. Yeah. And the airlines are suffering the consequences of unhappy customers and something that's beyond their control.
Absolutely. In the airlines, they want it to be as convenient as possible. They don't want you driving to Dallas. They'd rather you fly with mm-hmm. them. So it's not the airlines. Congress can't reach an agreement. Getting into college, the hardest college to get into, according to this study, is Caltech. And they only take about 3% of the ones that apply. And dummies don't apply at Caltech. Columbia, Harvard, Stanford, University of Chicago, and Yale were all tied at 4%. And then Brown University was 5%. And, my stepdaughter was looking at one time going to Brown. And I told my friend Fastball Walker, she may go to Brown University. And he said, "Who do they play in football? Yellow and green and blue?" And, he hadn't heard of them. And that in Dartmouth, in the Curtis Institute of Music, which I've never heard of. MIT is also 5%. And I never think about MIT. I don't think about J. Fred Busey, who grew up in Tahoka, Texas, a little town about 2,000 to 3,000 people south of Lubbock. And his chemistry teacher realized this kid was really smart. And so she went out and talked to his dad, and he had been on a tractor, and she said, I want to talk to you about Fred going to college. And she said, I think he can get in MIT. And he said, where is that? She said, it's Cambridge, Massachusetts. He said, look, if he goes to Cambridge and they go broke, I can't go get him. He'll have to hitchhike home. It's dangerous hitchhiking. But if he goes to Texas Tech and I go up there and see those football games, he can call me, I can go get him if they go broke. She tried to assure him that, MIT wasn't going to go broke and Texas Tech wasn't going to go broke. And but he was adamant that he didn't want him going up there, and he didn't. And he went to Tech and majored in physics, had a 4.0, and he got a full scholarship for a master's at MIT. And his dad said, that's okay, you can go up there and get a master's. And he wound up being president of Texas Instruments for about 20 years.
Oh, wow.
And was a great guy to deal with.
Is he the guy that you were having breakfast with one day and he insisted upon a certain amount of funding go to?
He wanted in the tax cut, he wanted on research and development, incremental income tax reductions and deductions and credits, tax credits. And he said, I'll loan you a quarter so you can go call. Didn't have cell phones, and I used the phone and got a hold of Secretary Reagan and told him that was one of the things we had to have in the tax cut, and it's still in there. And he thought it was very important that we encourage businesses to come up with new innovation, and that we do that in the United States, we'll get a great benefit from it. And he was exactly right. J. Fred Busey was a real hardcore American, and he didn't see things gray. He either liked it or didn't like it. And when he was on the board at Texas Tech for 18 years.
Wow.
And tied a record in that regard. But he knew what he wanted and what he wanted done, and he expected you to do it. And if you worked for him, he had high standards, but he didn't let you work, more than he did. He set the standard, and you could try to catch up if you wanted to. And he was excellent. Saying of the day was, you cannot go back and start the beginning all over, but you can start and make sure the ending is going to be a lot better.